Good evening. I'm Hope Preston. Welcome to the Washington County Master Gardener's monthly presentation. Tonight, our presentation is on the emerald ash borer. The trees on my property that are not willows are ashes, so I am very interested in this topic. Our speaker tonight is Lilah Gonen. They are a community assistance forester in the Urban and Community Forestry Program at the Oregon Department of Forestry. Got all of that? Where they also serve as the agency's Emerald Ash Borer Coordinator. In these roles, Lilah helps manage the state's response to EAB and assists communities in their planning and response to EAB and other urban forest disturbances. Away from work, Lilah is a newly minted Multnomah County Master Gardener. Welcome to the Master Gardeners, and enjoys gardening, clearly, climbing, cooking, mushroom hunting with their dog, and pointing out all the invasive species and plant diseases they see while out walking and hiking with friends. Lilah, I want to go on one of your walks. And now, with no further ado, I will turn it over to Lilah.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I should note, there is an update. I'm actually no longer serving as the EAB coordinator for the state. I passed that baton along to a couple of other folks who, at the end of the presentation, I'll share with you all an email address that you all can reach out to if at any point you have any specific questions about emerald ash borer or invasive pests in the state of Oregon. And those folks will be the ones manning that email address now. But I still do talk about emerald ash borer quite a lot. It's still very much in my wheelhouse, just a little bit less of my day-to-day work. So I don't want to steal the thunder of other people.
And Lilah, I need to interrupt because I forgot to say one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have questions, participants, as we are going through this, please type them into the Q&A, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go through the questions and get them all answered then. So thank you, and back to you, Lilah.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't have much more to say about myself. I'm just going to jump right into Emerald Ash Borer because I have a lot to share with you all today, and I want to make sure that we get through it all in the time that we have allotted. So, actually, I'm just going to share a little bit about my program, a little bit about the work that we do. So, Oregon Department of Forestry, I think probably all of you have heard about Oregon Department of Forestry, pretty major agency in the state of Oregon. I work for the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which is a really pretty small program within ODF. We're small, but we're mighty, and we're actually have been expanding quite a bit over the last few years. And the purview of our work is that we assist communities across the state, really primarily municipalities, but also anyone else who manages land in the built environment. So that includes utilities, regional governments like soil and water conservation districts, nonprofits, universities, and university groups. So Master Gardener very much falls within that purview, assisting those entities in managing green space and managing, in particular, trees as it relates to the built environment. So traditional urban forestry would be like managing the trees along the right-of-way strips, like street trees and park trees and yard trees. But we're also kind of expanding a little bit more into trees in the wild and urban or wildland urban interface, trees in rural communities that are not necessarily managed for commercial timber, things like that. So emerald ash borer, as we'll kind of talk about over the course of the presentation, very much falls into the realm of urban and community forestry because this is a forest pest that really targets trees in the built environment. This is a pest that many people are going to see the impacts of in their day-to-day lives. So the general flow of the presentation today, I'm just going to introduce emerald ash borer, or EAB, as I'll be referring to it primarily, to you all today. Share with you a little bit about how the state has been responding to EAB being present here in Oregon. Talking a little about the host, about ash trees, how to identify them and their importance on the landscape. I'm going to share with you all how to identify the signs and symptoms of EAB in ash trees and empower you all to understand how to report if you believe that you have seen or someone else has seen those signs and symptoms of EAB, because we do want to know about new emerald ash borer infestations around Oregon. Finally, what can you actually do about emerald ash borer? I'm going to share some management options that exist out there. And then lastly, I have a list of, I always share resources with folks, but being a master gardener myself and being familiar with, tabling at farmers markets and manning um, the helpline, I understand a little bit about the kinds of inquiries that we get and the types of resources that are appropriate for master gardeners. So I wanted to share some that I thought were particularly appropriate for this audience, and I hope that they will be helpful for you all moving forward. I also did, these slides are available as a PDF that I think will be shared in the chat at some point, or maybe multiple points throughout this presentation, so that you have access to them. They have links all throughout them, and I want you to be able to use them as you reference EAB over the course of your Master Gardener volunteer work. So what is emerald ash borer or EAB? This is a beetle. It is an invasive and highly destructive wood-boring beetle that infests and kills ash trees. It actually also does infest a couple other trees in the same family as ash. It's the Oleaceae family. It's the family that contains olive trees and lilac shrubs and trees, and ash and jasmine and a few others. In particular, it will also infest olive trees and white fringe tree. Those are in the Oleaceae family as well. But it heavily prefers ash trees, and in Oregon, we don't really see that much olive and white fringe. We primarily see ash. So that is really what I'm going to be focusing my presentation today. But do understand that if you travel around, maybe down in California, olive might actually be much more of an issue if and when emerald ash borer arrives in that state. So it's a beetle, but it's actually the larvae that are doing the bulk of the damage in ash trees. So the adult beetles will fly, they'll land on the bark of ash trees, they'll lay their eggs in the crevices of the bark, and then the larvae will hatch and out of those eggs, and they'll burrow into the inner bark of the tree. And they'll only burrow about an inch or two deep, and they'll hang out in that inner bark layer, the phloem, if you recall from your from botany courses, and they'll feed on that inner bark, on that phloem and on that cambium, where there's a lot of that vascular tissue, where that active cell division is occurring, where that tissue is a little bit more succulent. It's also where the tree is really transporting a lot of water and a lot of sugars, a lot of photosynthate from the leaves down into the roots, and then water from the roots up into really up and down the entire stem of the tree. So over the course of about 3 to 7 years or so, all that feeding that's happening in that inner layer of the bark is going to eventually girdle and kill the tree. So they kind of kill the tree from the inside out, and they're actually really hard to spot as a result of most of that activity happening inside of the tree. At this point, we don't have any way to eradicate emerald ash borer once it arrives in an area. It has really taken hold in just about every location that it's been introduced. That's really important to understand as we're dealing with EAB. So the life cycle of emerald ash borer, I'm not going to go into like really minute detail here, but what is really important to understand about EAB is that it is most active in the summertime, between late May and like September. That's when the emerald ash borer adults are active and flying, and they're mating, and they are laying their eggs, and those larvae are hatching out of the eggs and burrowing into the tree. The larvae will then overwinter in the tree, and they'll spend 1 to 2 years living inside the tree feeding, where they'll go through multiple different like larval stages. And then they will pupate, and then eventually in around May or June, when the temperatures warm up enough, they will form into adults, and those adults will actually burst out, like they'll emerge out of the tree, and that cycle will continue. But they are most active flying outside of the tree in the summertime. What does that infestation actually look like inside of the tree? It can kill the tree rather quickly, as you can see from this graphic here. Really, this shows tree death in the span of 5 years, but if you're in really high population density areas, EAB can actually kill a tree within about 3 years or so. And as you can see from these kind of photos that I've overlaid at the top here, Those first couple of years, you might not really see that much going on outside the tree again, because all that activity is happening inside. And ash trees are actually, in particular, pretty resilient to disturbances. And actually, a lot of times on the landscape will kind of not look very good, despite being perfectly, or not perfectly healthy, but healthy enough to survive. So a lot of us are kind of accustomed to seeing ash trees of multiple species, having some dead branches here and there. And really not looking their best and not really thinking much of it. So it's really easy to miss emerald ash borer if you're only looking at just like the general vigor of the tree. It's really important to take a closer look. And I'll go into that a little bit later about how to actually ID the signs and symptoms. But what's important is that about this is that once a tree really starts to show that it is on the decline, this is when it's actually too late to, oftentimes it's too late to save the tree. We do have some methods for actually saving trees and preventing them from being killed by emerald ash borer, but these methods have to be preventative. You actually have to act pretty proactively to prevent the trees from being killed. On the community scale, it's really important to understand the concept of exponential growth when you're talking about EAB. Um, if gone unchecked without any type of response, what we've seen, emerald ash borer has been more prevalent, and I'll go into this in a second, in the Midwest and the East Coast for the past 20 years or so. And we have seen out there in communities that were caught, off guard and didn't really understand at the time the implications that emerald ash borer had in their communities, really massive exponential die-off of ash trees in those communities in a pretty short period of time. Gone completely unchecked, you could have nearly 100% ash mortality in the span of about 15 years after EAB is introduced into an area. And that rate of mortality can very well outpace a community's actual ability to deal with all of those dead and dying trees. That means, tree crews that can't keep up, cities whose budgets can't keep up, neighborhoods that can lose massive amounts of canopy all at once if they're planted with a lot of ash trees. The implications are actually really rather dire. So like I mentioned, EAB was first introduced into the US in actually probably in the 90s, but we only detected it for the first time in 2002 in Michigan. So this map here is just blown up of the Great Lakes region, showing you the little area around Detroit where emerald ash borer was first detected in 2002. And it spread extremely quickly. This is really fast for an invasive pest to spread across the country. So this is 5-year increments. You can see that by 2017, there was a detection already in Colorado near Denver. And then finally in 2022, we had our first detection of emerald ash borer on the West Coast, actually, of entire North America. It was detected in Forest Grove, which is, as you all know, in Washington County. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that EAB is present in your county. And unfortunately, since then, we have also detected it this past summer in 3 new counties in Oregon. So right now we know of EAB infestations in Washington, Yamhill, Clackamas, and Marion counties. So these 4 counties are currently under a quarantine that's put in place by Oregon Department of Agriculture. I'll go into a little bit of details about what that quarantine actually entails a little bit later, but it's kind of, at this point, it's one large contiguous area. If we found emerald ash borer in Portland and Multnomah County, that quarantine would expand to Multnomah County and it would be one larger blob. But if we happen to find emerald ash borer down further south in, say, Lane County, now we would have kind of 2 distinct blobs of a quarantine. So that quarantine is automatically updated when EAB is confirmed in a new county. So that quarantine was kind of one part of the state's response to emerald ash borer. There are multiple agencies that are part of that response effort in the state. Chief among them are kind of the major players are Oregon Department of Agriculture. They're kind of considered the lead agency. They're the one that they actually have regulatory authority, so they put a quarantine in place. They lead the survey and monitoring efforts of emerald ash borer throughout the state. They also have the ability to regulate movement of plant materials through nurseries. They regulate nurseries, so they're able to have a little bit of sway there. I work for Oregon Department of Forestry. We do have regulatory authority on other aspects of managing trees, but for EAB, not as much. We're really more of a partner in surveying and monitoring, in education and providing outreach, and helping communities with tree inventory and providing management advice. OSU is also one of the major players. They are this, that the university provides community education. A lot of the scientific research that's happening in the state is occurring through OSU, as well as advising landowners and members of the community through extension. And the Master Gardener program falls directly within that extension arm. So do know that you all as Master Gardeners are actually by default part of the state's response to emerald ash borer. And then finally, we also work with federal partners, in this case, USDA APHIS. APHIS stands for Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. They are the agency that is responsible for basically preventing as many invasive species from entering the country as possible and enforcing that around the country. However, a lot of the work actually happens on the ground with local partners. So this is kind of a statewide effort, but we work a lot with folks who are more immediately involved in managing land in the communities that are actually affected by EAB. A little bit of a timeline of those efforts. Fortunately, the state has been thinking about responding to EAB for about almost 10 years or so prior to actually detecting it in the state. We saw the writing on the wall of what was going on out east, and decided let's start trapping for it. That was like all the way back in 2013, and seeing if we could get any detections through the trapping efforts. In 2018, the state created an EAB readiness and response plan. So we had a blueprint in place ready to go for whenever the day came that EAB was detected. Part of that response plan was to actually start collecting seeds from native Oregon ash to preserve that gene pool. One of the major things that we heard from folks out east was one of their major regrets was that they didn't have enough time to preserve genetics of native ash trees out there. So they collected ash seeds from all up and down the Willamette Valley and different locations throughout the state, also to participate in resistance breeding for EAB. Finally, in 2022, we had our first detection of EAB. Fortunately, we had a readiness and response plan already in place. And then in 2023 and 2024, these past couple of years, we've done a lot of visual surveying and trapping that has increased. The state has enacted a program called SLAM, which stands for Slowing Ash Mortality. I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but it involves girdling trees and treating them with insecticide and kind of trying to create population sinks of emerald ash borer in a place to keep it as contained as possible. Also, we've been releasing biocontrol agents, which are in the form of parasitic wasps that are really, really targeted and actually quite useful in controlling populations of EAB. And then, of course, we've discovered those new infestations in 2024, this past summer. Already in Oregon, we are seeing trees being lost to emerald ash borer. This is a before and after. This is actually just taken, the photo on the bottom was taken the next day of a neighborhood in Forest Grove that was planted. This street was planted entirely with ash trees up and down. They were all heavily infested. This was right next to where the first infestation was found. So unfortunately, this neighborhood did not have enough time to prepare for EAB, and unfortunately these trees had to be cut down because they were too heavily infested. The good news is about a year later, almost a year after these trees were removed, we were able to help with replanting. This is a wide diversity of trees that were replanted here, no ash trees in sight anymore, and I think it's maybe, I don't remember how many species it is, but it's far more than just a single genus. So this is something that comes up a lot with, as I'm sure you all as master gardeners are really familiar, there's real resiliency that comes with planting a diversity of plants, and urban trees are no exception here. So, why is this like idea of urban trees being infested, why is that such a big deal, and why is that something that's so top of mind for us? It's that EAB, if when it arrives in an area, if nothing is done, it will kill your ash trees. All ash trees are susceptible to emerald ash borer. in North America. All North American and European ash trees are susceptible to it. And ash trees, when they die or when they are dying, are dangerous. All trees are dangerous as they die, as they become brittle. Ash trees are especially so. They actually are uniquely capable of holding a pretty large amount of water in their vascular system. And when they die, they start to dry out and they become extremely brittle. So not only are they extremely dangerous, it's also extremely expensive and dangerous to work and remove dead and dying ash trees. So this is why prevention and this is why working preemptively is so important for emerald ash borer, is that you could end up with situations like this that have been really prevalent all across the Midwest and East Coast in communities that did not have enough time to prepare. Um, of course, not only is this really dangerous, it's really expensive, not only for removal, you need specialized equipment when you're dealing with dead and dying trees. It's also potentially very expensive if those trees fall on property and, God forbid, on people. Of course, that is the most expensive loss that you could possibly have. Okay, so I'm talking about ash trees a lot. I want to make sure that you are all familiar with ash trees as a host. So this might be some review for some of you who are familiar already with tree identification, with ash trees in particular, but I think it's really good review. I think ash are not a genus that gets a ton of attention outside of the world of emerald ash borer. We even have a native ash tree here in Oregon, and I can tell you from my experience in ODF, even people who've worked in forestry for many decades are still not super familiar with identifying our native Oregon ash tree. So just to go over, ash is a pretty diverse genus. There's quite a number of species within this genus all throughout the Northern Hemisphere, in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. Many European species and Eastern North American species are planted as urban trees here. So there's quite a bit of diversity. However, there are some characteristics that really do set ash apart as a genus. So if you have these kind of characteristics all in one tree, you know that you're almost certainly looking at an ash tree. So first, actually, this is funny. The first characteristic that I have here, which is the furrowed gray bark, this is actually one of the least universal ones. So most ash species, as they get older, will develop this kind of furrowed diamond-shaped pattern in their bark. However, not all species. There's at least one species that I know of that keeps smooth bark as it gets older, which is flowering ash, Fraxinus ornis. Um, and also young ash trees have smooth bark as well. So I wouldn't rely on furrowed gray bark as your main identifying feature of ash trees. Also, generally identifying trees using bark is not the most useful tool. The buds of ash are actually pretty distinctive from one another, and this is a really useful tool if you're doing winter identification of ash, but not a lot of people spend a lot of time looking at buds. They're not a super charismatic part of a tree, but if you are a person who likes using buds for identification, they look kind of like chocolate chips, pretty distinctly like chocolate chips on the end of ash twigs. Also, and then I'm going to move all the way to the right here. The fruit of the ash tree come in the form of single-winged samaras. So samara is like a little, the same thing as what maple trees produce, those little two-winged helicopters. It's very similar in ash, except it's a single wing instead of two wings. Elm trees also produce these kind of samaras as well. So ash are dioecious, meaning you have like trees that produce mostly male flowers and trees that produce mostly female flowers. And it's only those female trees that will produce these samaras. So it's not even all ash trees that'll produce these. And they're also only really hanging out on the tree in throughout the fall and maybe kind of into the winter a little bit. But if you see a tree with the samaras, there's a good chance that it's an ash tree. I do want to draw your attention, though, in particular to the pinnately compound leaves and the opposite branching. These two features together are probably the most useful for IDing ash. Ash all have pinnately compound leaves. So if you remember from your botany coursework, that is this leaf that's here. This is a single leaf. And those little leaflets, those are all part of the same leaf. They're all part of one stem, and there's a terminal leaflet at the very end. All ash trees have pinnately compound leaves. All ash trees also branch in an opposite pattern. So I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like in a second. This image here just is a reminder of what a compound leaf is versus a simple leaf with that terminal leaflet at the very end. Ash will always have an odd number of leaflets on their compound leaves. Those leaflets will be arranged in an opposite pattern from one another on the leaf. And those leaves will also be arranged opposite one another on the branch. So this picture here on the right shows you, okay, you have six leaves on here, each with about, oh, like 7 leaflets or so. And those leaflets are arranged opposite one another, and then those leaves are also, you can see, really distinctly opposite one another on the branch. And that's really important because there are a lot of trees out there that produce pinnately compound leaves with leaflets that are arranged opposite one another, but a lot of them, the leaves are actually alternately arranged from each other, not opposite. And so if you see pinnately compound leaves that are arranged opposite one another on the branch, it's like 95% of the time you're looking at an ash tree. Whoop. Everything on the ash tree is in an opposite arrangement. So the trees, as they get older and more mature, you'll see this really distinctive V-shaped pattern start to emerge on the tree. Oh man, the animation keeps disappearing. And then in the wintertime, you'll see this really distinctive kind of trident pattern emerging on the bare branches. So again, opposite branching, pinnately compound leaves, you've got yourself an ash tree, almost certainly. Some trees that are commonly mistaken for ash include mountain ash, which unfortunately has the word ash in the common name, even though it's not remotely related to true ash trees. Tree of heaven and walnuts, these are all trees with pinnately compound leaves, with many of them opposite leaflets. However, something that really sets them apart from ash, again, is that they all have alternate branching. So again, those are your really strong botany clues for understanding if you're looking at an ash tree. Where do we see ash in Oregon? Well, we kind of see them everywhere. We see ash in natural areas, which include riparian ecosystems, so like riverbanks, streams, creeks, and wetland forests. Ash are also found in urban areas. They're frequently in right-of-way plantings and streets and parks and yards. And then when development comes into contact with a natural area ecosystem, you can get that third type, which is in the wildland-urban interface, which is a site that resembles riparian areas, but with the risks that are associated with urban sites. And I know for a fact that in Washington County, there are a lot of these kind of wooey ash spaces. So in these kind of natural areas and wooey areas, wildland-urban interface, you see ash in riparian corridors in particular, and they can be kind of heavily fragmented and altered on the landscape a lot of the time, especially if they're interacting with the built environment. And much of the time, these areas are going to be populated with Fraxinus latifolia, which is Oregon ash. It's our only native ash tree here. But it's a really important riparian and wetland tree. It provides critical habitat for threatened and endangered species, and it's also historically been a really important cultural resource for indigenous peoples here in the Pacific Northwest. Riparian areas are an incredibly important ecosystem that provide a real wide variety of services, not only for the plants and animals and organisms that are living in that ecosystem, but also for the ecosystem functioning across, the entire region, right? Water is like the number one product that I always talk about water being the number one forest product. It's a much more, in my mind, important product than timber even, just for, the functioning of our society. So we always say to people like, do you enjoy fishing? Do you enjoy hiking? Do you enjoy drinking uncontaminated water? I think probably everybody does. So all of those activities and far more are impacted by our riparian area buffer zones and the healthy functioning of those ecosystems. So some of those important functions include reducing excess nitrates from leaching into waterways, sequestering massive amounts of carbon, increasing wildlife corridors, creating habitat for fish, and also preventing floods. So Oregon ash as a tree are really uniquely adapted to living in flooded conditions. So they tend to grow very close or even within the waterways themselves. So that provides really critical shade. They are literally growing in the waterway and they're shading that waterway and keeping those water temperatures cool. They're also providing really important stream bank stabilization. Their roots are like literally inside the soil of the stream bank. And they're also, again, capable of absorbing really massive amounts of water in their vascular tissue, and that helps with mitigating flooding. So the ash trees would be like, here, I'll get my laser pointer, like these trees right here that are living in this flooded water right here. So you can imagine losing those trees, especially losing those trees very quickly in the span of like 3 to 7 years to emerald ash borer, could have really major downstream, so to speak, effects on our ecosystems. And not only that, but like on the cleanliness of our drinking water, for example, here in Oregon. Ash are also really common, like I've been talking about, in urban areas. So there are really a wide variety of ash species that are commonly planted in streets and in parks and in private property. And I don't think I really need to stress to you all as an audience, I'm sure you're all very well aware of the importance that trees as green infrastructure provide to us and all the kind of multiple benefits that are incurred by living among trees and living among trees in the built environment. So like in riparian areas, urban trees, including ash, help with stormwater retention. They help with producing shade to reduce, urban heat. They can also help remove air pollution from the air. There's multiple health and safety benefits that come with having trees in the urban ecosystem, as well as equity impacts. We know that neighborhoods that are of lower income or industrialized neighborhoods or neighborhoods that have been historically redlined, et cetera, are heavily associated with having lower tree canopy. So if a neighborhood has low tree canopy, and even if one or two of those trees is an ash tree and it dies from an EAB infestation, that loss of a single or two or three trees is going to have pretty major impacts on the overall canopy of an already under-canopied neighborhood versus a neighborhood that's maybe a bit wealthier, maybe had investments of trees, 100 years ago and has a beautiful, diverse canopy of trees all throughout the neighborhood. If one or two of those ash trees dies, it's going to have a larger overall impact proportionally on the neighborhood than, a low canopy neighborhood with the same number of ash trees. Okay, so now that we understand what ash trees look like and their importance and where they're located on the landscape, I want to go into how to actually recognize the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer. And it's important, I'm going really only into the signs and symptoms of EAB and not so much about how to identify the beetles themselves. And that is because you're highly unlikely to really ever see these beetles, even in a heavily infested area. They're very small, they're only flying for a very short period of time out of the year, and they're mostly spending time up in the canopy of the trees. So they're rather cryptic. It's much more telling to actually look for how the tree is responding and the signs that the beetles are leaving behind. So first, as with pretty much all tree health issues, you want to look for general signs of canopy decline, and you want to look for epicormic sprouts or shoots. So that's indicating that the tree is stressed and it starts putting out shoots lower down in the tree. Also, woodpecker activity. So because the EAB larvae are pretty shallow in the tree, the woodpeckers can actually hear them in there and they can sense their vibrations and they will begin to fleck away at the outer bark of the tree and they'll drill holes and they'll leave this kind of blonding pattern behind. Oftentimes this will start high up in the canopy. So if you start noticing lots of woodpecker activity kind of high up in like a living ash tree, that's something that you should definitely take note of. However, when it comes to the sort of general signs of stress in an ash tree, it's not really telling you that much. Plus, ash trees are oftentimes kind of looking kind of stressed anyway, even without emerald ash borer. The woodpecker activity, though, that is definitely something to be on the lookout for. So we're giving this kind of like one chili pepper for the canopy decline and the epicormic shoots, and maybe two chili peppers, kind of getting into like medium territory for the woodpecker damage. But what you really should be on the lookout for are some that are more distinctive signs of EAB. So first, bark splits. As the EAB larvae feed underneath the bark will actually kind of delaminate a little bit from the tree and will begin to split. And if you look closely, you can actually see here, and oftentimes under the splits, or if you have a knife with you, you can kind of pull them back. You actually see larval galleries underneath. So this is a tree that's completely dead here, and the bark has completely split away. And these are S-shaped or serpentine larval galleries, very distinctly S-shaped for EAB larvae. And finally, the exit holes that the adults leave behind when they leave the tree are very distinctly D-shaped. Like they really look like the letter D, very clean lines. They're about 1/8 of an inch large. This is kind of for scale with a woodpecker hole, which is round and a little bit rough around the edges. EAB exit holes will always be very distinctly D-shaped. If you see These, any three of these things on an ash tree, that's like your 5 alarm fire. This is where you want to report what you've seen to the Oregon Invasives Hotline. I'll give you a little bit more information about how to do that in a moment. First, just overview of some damage that is not caused by EAB, of some things that we do sometimes get reported to the hotline. First, number one, sapsuckers creating rows of shallow holes in the bark. This can be confused with EAB exit holes, but they tend to occur in rows. They tend to be, not really D-shaped, and they're kind of like really densely packed next to each other. Number two, this is Oregon ash bark beetles that have attacked dead or dying ash trees. The galleries are not S-shaped, and they're really only going after trees that are already dead. Number three, this is beaver damage on a stand of Oregon ash, so it can cause canopy or tree death. But again, if you go up close to those trees, you're not going to see those distinctive signs of EAB. Number four, anthracnose fungus is a really common leaf spotting kind of disease in Oregon ash. It's not really fatal. It just kind of causes them to look a little bit crappy toward the end of the year. That's not emerald ash borer. And finally, number five, this is fall webworms that feed on ash leaves and create webbing tents around them. Again, nothing really to be concerned about here. But if you do see those distinctive signs and symptoms of EAB, you can make a report using the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline. This is an online form. This is actually a link right here. So if you in that PDF, you'll be able to click on that link. You can take photos of what you're seeing. You can put in the tree location on a map, and you can make a report through there and really be really descriptive in what it is that you see. This is actually checked on a regular basis by state staff. And we do respond to anything that looks particularly suspicious. So really useful tool, not only for EAB, but for other emergent invasives in Oregon. Just to highlight the importance of the reporting system, in the summer of 2024, we detected an infestation along the Marion and Clackamas County border. For this one infestation, there were 3 methods that were kind of simultaneously used to detect. So there was a positive trap, there was tree surveying, and there was also, really importantly, a hotline report from a tree worker who had just attended a training just like this one. So again, we do check the hotline regularly, and we do follow up with anything that looks suspicious. So if you do have this kind of EAB training, you know what to look out for. Please do use the hotline if you're in a county, especially, or an area where we don't know of EAB, and you think you've seen EAB, and you can reference these photos that I've shared with you. You could be, the next person to find it in Oregon. So it's a really important tool. All right, so managing emerald ash borer. How do we actually deal with this insect? I did mention to you earlier that there's no known eradication method for emerald ash borer. So once it arrives in an area, it's kind of inevitable that it is going to spread and it's going to kill trees. So sometimes people say, well, what is even the point? If it's already here, I'm just going to throw my hands up and give up. I say no, no. Yes, it will spread, but we do have the power, we do have the ability to slow the spread of emerald ash borer. This will minimize its impact, and it will give communities more time to prepare. Like I've mentioned, there are so many costs that come with responding to emerald ash borer, both costs, financial costs, but also ecosystem costs, potentially even human costs. We can limit those. We can limit those costs as much as we possibly can. It really is just, in my mind, the right thing to do. So the number one way that every single person can engage with this and can limit the spread of emerald ash borer, not just emerald ash borer, but many other forest pests and pathogen, is to not move firewood. This is like the number one message, because every single person has the ability to do this. If you do, camping, obviously, and burning firewood is such an important part of life in the Pacific Northwest. So we really want to encourage people to buy or collect firewood within 10 miles of where they plan to burn it. It's probably how emerald ash borer arrived in Oregon, and it's absolutely how emerald ash borer spread so quickly around the Midwest when it first arrived. We think that it actually got here through infested shipping pallets or shipping material, pallets or dunnage or crates, something like that. So it does hang out in infested wood for about a year or two after the tree has been cut down. So if you're harvesting infested trees, even if you don't know that they're infested or someone is harvesting them, you really do have the potential to move this insect around pretty far. Related to that, please follow the quarantine. Please understand where you're located within the quarantine and follow the rules. I'll go into that a little bit in a moment. Stop planting ash trees. It's kind of at this point inevitable that any ash tree that's put in the ground is just going to kind of be a waste of money. It will eventually either become infested and die, or you'll have to treat it with insecticide to keep it alive. May as well just plant something that's not going to have to go through that type of effort. And finally, ISA certified arborists are our friends. They're getting also trained up all across the state over the past few years. Anytime that you have any type of question, you or anyone that you're consulting with has any type of question about a tree, whether it's ash or otherwise, please refer them to an ISA certified arborist. I'm going to mention this a few more times in my talk. So the quarantine, like I've mentioned, there's an active quarantine around Washington, Yamhill, Clackamas, and Marion counties. It does restrict the movement of ash material outside those counties. It requires that those ash material be treated in some way, which includes chipping under 1 inch, heat treatment, incineration, or processing into secondary materials. It also limits any tree removal and pruning to the winter months. Again, like I mentioned, emerald ash borer is most active in the summertime, so we want to keep any type of disturbance of trees or wood material to the time that it's least active to prevent the spread as much as possible. So when it actually comes to your management options, what do we have available to us? The options are unfortunately rather limited, but they are still options. And I still do want to stress that they are really useful options, even if doesn't lead to complete eradication. So option 1 is to remove and replace trees. This is ideal for trees that are already in poor condition or areas where you're already wanting to replace your canopy. Treatment, there are insecticide treatment options. This is ideal for areas where you want to maintain canopy, where you want to reduce costs. Treatment will be your cheapest option, and also for areas that are under municipal management. And finally, the last option, people don't always think of it as an option, but it is an option, is to do nothing. This is actually can be a really useful option in natural areas with really low traffic, or there's not really much infrastructure, or if you want to create habitat through snags. But I will say it still can be, I'll go into exactly what the limitations are there. Importantly, though, these are not mutually exclusive from one another. You can have a management plan in place that involves all 3 or just 2 of these management options. So removing and replacing trees. This is, again, useful if you're dealing with small trees. Small trees are pretty cheap to remove, and you can replant them and kind of regain their ecosystem benefits pretty quickly after replanting them. Also, it's useful for trees that are already high risk. So if they're defective, dying, or poorly sited, they're just not really growing in a good place, you may as well just, remove them preemptively before emerald ash borer comes and gets them and replace them with something else. You want to do this while the tree is still alive. Like I've mentioned, dead and dying trees are really expensive and difficult to remove oftentimes. You want to replace with a diverse selection of species. We don't want to repeat the issue of, a boulevard lined with beautiful elm trees. They all die of Dutch elm disease. And the community decides, great, let's replace them with a boulevard full of ash trees. And then, 20 years later, they get wiped out with emerald ash borer. That's what was seen out in the Midwest multiple times. We don't want to repeat those mistakes again. Plant a diversity of trees, please. Removing and replacing trees is going to be expensive. It's always expensive to remove trees, but that risk is controlled. You want to definitely comply with all local regulations, obtain all necessary permits. You want to plant if you're working in a municipality that has an approved species list, work within that list, and of course, consult with an ISA certified arborist. Treatment, insecticide treatment, there's at least one good option out there for insecticide treatment. It can be up to 95% effective in preventing tree death, depending on the treatment type and the proper application. You want to target healthy trees that are already in good condition, that are medium to large diameter trees. It's not really feasible across an entire landscape because you need, as you can see from this image here, the most effective option is a systemic trunk injection. So you have to go up to every single individual tree and inject them with insecticide. You also have to do this once every 1 to 3 years. So you really want to target trees that are high value that you want to keep on the landscape. This is typically the cheapest option, and it's also the lowest risk out of all of them. When you're making decisions on using pesticides, you always want to consider the active ingredient efficacy, the frequency of the application method, the potential for non-target effects, and whether a pesticide applicator license is required. As I'm going to keep repeating, do consult with an ISA certified arborist on all of these fronts. So these considerations are going to tell you basically what the risks are of using this insecticide and if those risks outweigh the benefits or vice versa. Like I've mentioned, there are many different insecticide treatment options out there, both with active ingredient and application method. But really, there's one that really does stand out as the gold standard. We're really lucky that we have 20+ years worth of data and experience from out east to guide our decision making. Trunk injections of the active ingredient emamectin benzoate has shown to be extremely effective at preventing tree death, even in areas with really high infestations. You want to inject it systemically, and you want to repeat this every 2 to 3 years. It has actually relatively very low off-target effects if it's applied by somebody who knows what they're doing on equipment that they have been trained on. So again, very important that it's administered by somebody with a licensed pesticide, who is a licensed pesticide applicator. I have a link down here for the fact sheet that this table was taken from. It has a lot more information on insecticide treatment. Again, consult with an arborist. And finally, doing nothing. Again, it is an option. In an urban area, not advised at all. However, in natural areas where there's low risk, very few targets around, difficult to access the site, doing nothing could actually be not a bad option. In urban areas, doing nothing will be the most expensive option in the long term because those trees will die, removing them will be extremely expensive, and if they do fall on something or someone, of course, like I've mentioned, that is ultimately the most expensive cost in the end. So it's most appropriate for those areas where you're not going to incur that risk and you're not going to have to come in and remove the trees later. Again, consult with an arborist. Okay, I'm almost done. I have this big list of resources here. I always share these resources at the end of my EAB presentations, but I put stars next to things that I think are particularly useful for you all as master gardeners. And I'm going to show you a little bit. I'm going to zoom into a few of these in a moment to just sort of share with you what they're all about. But really, beyond the stars, I also want to point out that we have a new website that's devoted entirely to emerald ash borer in Oregon. This is a pretty new website. It was launched about a month or so ago, and all of these resources that are here on this slide, they are all on this website. I'm going to show you a little preview of what it looks like. This is the homepage of the EAB website. I think it's pretty useful. I helped develop it though, so I'm a little bit biased, but it really contains like everything. And I will say this is an ODF product. It was made in collaboration with ODA. OSU, and the Oregon Invasive Species Council. So in my mind, I do believe that all of the resources that are provided on this website would be really appropriate tools for you all to use as master gardeners as you're crafting your responses to members of the public. One of the coolest tools here is this Oregon EAB map. This is an interactive web map that contains like a lot of different data layers about emerald ash borer throughout the state, including like tree surveys, so where the infestations are, trap data, as well as a field where you can actually enter your address and find out where you are relative to a known EAB infestation. And it actually will give you some management guidance based on your location and your distance from an active infestation. So it's a really useful tool. OSU also has an entire page devoted to emerald ash borer resources. So we all as master gardeners should really be prioritizing resources that are put out by universities, by research institutions that are credible. OSU has a bunch of resources available here on this page. These headers, by the way, are also links, so you can access these pages through there. A really cool option that's offered through OSU is a free online training called the Oregon Forest Pest Detector Training. You can learn a lot about how, a bit more in depth about how to ID emerald ash borer in the field, as well as a variety of other invasive pests. I know that OSU recently received some funding to update this program and make it a little bit more relevant to Oregon, and I believe that it's slated to be released sometime in the fall. So if you wait a few more months, you'll probably get an even better version of this product if you're interested in taking this course. Here's that insecticide treatment fact sheet that I shared with you earlier. This was put out by Oregon Department of Forestry and contains a lot more information about insecticide treatment as an option. It's a really cool tool because it actually is, again, really effective at keeping trees alive, potentially in the long term. But of course, we should always be really mindful when using insecticides. It's something that some people come at with a lot of skepticism. So we want to make sure that we're able to, really address everybody's questions and concerns when it comes to insecticides. Finally, this is the actual fact sheet that goes into more details about the quarantine. This is just a screenshot from it, but if you scroll down on the fact sheet, if you're on this page, you'll actually see what those treatment options are that are approved for moving ash material. And finally, I keep referencing finding an ISA certified arborist. This is a really, really good URL to memorize, treesaregood.org. Anytime someone comes up to you with a tree related question, I've got a tree in my backyard, I think it might be dying, what do I do with it? Whether it's related to emerald ash borer or not, really, really good to refer people to certified arborists. So if you remember this URL, really easy to remember and write down on a card for people to take home. Also good to know is that many arborists will do free consultations. They'll come on and at least tell you what's going on before, of course, then charging money to do the actual work. All right, that's all I've got. I will always end with this kind of silver lining that the one kind of small little upside of emerald ash borer is that native woodpeckers are going to be really happy. They're going to have a really nice, stable food source for themselves over the next few years. Here's that email address that I mentioned earlier. Please do visit the Oregon EAB website for all of your EAB questions. I hope they could all be addressed on that site. But in case they're not, you can email this email address, invasivepests@odf.oregon.gov, for anything a little bit more specific. And that's what I've got. So thank you.
Well, thank you so very much. This was a wonderful, though depressing presentation, but I guess that's your life, isn't it?
Yeah, I always try to think of what the upside can be, and I try to stay positive and knowing that there actually is a lot that we can do. We're really well informed at this point. There are some inevitabilities, but at least we can make it a little bit better than the worst case scenario.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And as somebody who works on the helpline, I refer people to Trees Are Good all the time.
Awesome.
Because it really is, we get so many questions that we can't answer on the phone. Somebody has to be out there, and look at the tree in question. And so we send a lot of people to that. So now I've got, there were several just comments about yay, the importance of diversity in planting. And as master gardeners, we appreciate that because we talk about that, as you know, as a master gardener all the time. And then one question is, can EAB be spread in the free wood chip drops?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. That is something that we talk to arborists about a lot. If chips are kept above an inch in diameter, there is a potential for the larvae to survive in the
Okay.
wood chips. If arborists keep their blades sharp on their wood chippers, that risk goes down. There's also some evidence that the actual concussive force of the wood chipper actually liquefies most of the larvae.
Okay.
So sorry to give you that visual, but yes, there is a potential that EAB can spread through chip drops. It's smaller than through firewood, but it does still exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And another question is, does EAB go after younger ash trees or mature ash trees, or does it distinguish?
As far as we know, it doesn't really distinguish. It can infest trees that are or even, shoots that are as small as an inch in diameter.
Oh,
So even those like ash will resprout really readily, especially Oregon ash. So even if you cut a tree down, it'll still stay alive for a long time, putting out shoots. And EAB can still even infest those 1 inch diameter shoots.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I personally have a question. I've got riparian property, and people came through, I think they were from Tualatin Soil and Water last year, and put silver discs on my ash trees that had numbers on them. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so I actually was working with them, I think on maybe on that project, or I kind of helped advise them on it. They were probably just inventorying your trees, and they just put a tag with a number so they could come back and reference that tree so they know, oh, okay, tree 35, we have it on our map here, and now we see it here on the landscape, and we see that it has the tag with that number on it.
Gotcha.
So I think what they were doing for that project is they were doing a kind of pretty comprehensive inventory of ash trees growing in these riparian woody areas
Yeah.
along private property, and doing a really kind of like fast-paced or collecting data to then help people do risk assessments for those trees. So if those trees were to become infested with EAB, what relative risk does each tree hold for the property nearby?
Okay. Well, this is very important, and I thank you very much. And we'll now finish this presentation and go into our chapter meeting. So Lilah, thank you so much for your time. And clearly you have done this a number of times. You were masterful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Really great to be here. Really exciting to get to present to folks, an audience that I'm, pretty intimately familiar with. And there's a good chance that I'll see you all, at an event, at a farmer's market or on a helpline shift or something like that. I think we've done a helpline shift
We
together.
did. You and I had a helpline
Yeah.
shift
And I
together.
actually think there was an EAB question
And
on
there
that.
was, and it
Yeah,
was a
it's kind of
mountain
funny.
ash, so you were able to take care of it.
There you go. Yeah, so if it hasn't come up already for you all, I'm sure you'll get at least one EAB question now that you've seen this presentation. So again,
Okay,
thank you all for having me, and I'll see you at some point probably.
see you later.
All
Okay,
right,
bye-bye.
bye.